Dr. Orin's scaly hands shook as he stared at the human DNA sequence, realizing he'd stumbled upon a secret with the power to reshape the galaxy, or plunge it into eternal darkness under the Zirathi. The renowned Hazari geneticist had been analyzing samples in his state-of-the-art lab on Zelos Prime when he noticed a sequence unlike any in the galactic database. Isolating it, he ran simulations that revealed the truth. This gene granted humans the ability to rapidly adapt to any environment or situation. As an advanced spacefaring race, humans had already proven themselves capable allies and deadly foes. With this power, they could be unstoppable, or they could be the galaxy's only hope against the Zirathi threat. An urgent message interrupted his racing thoughts. The mysterious Zirathi had emerged from the depths of space, enslaving entire star systems with advanced technology and psionics. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting to plan a defense. Orin knew he had to share his discovery, but feared it could be misused in the wrong hands. As he wrestled with the implications, one fact became clear. Without the humans and their hidden potential, the galaxy would surely fall to the Zirathi. The fate of trillions rested on his next move. The chamber fell silent as Orin finished his report, the weight of his discovery settling over the gathered council members. "Let me get this straight," the Zirathi representative, a being of pure energy, interjected. "You're suggesting we place our trust in these humans? They've barely mastered interstellar travel." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room, until a strong voice cut through the chatter. "I understand your concerns," Brian said, rising from his seat, "but we humans have proven our worth time and again. We're adaptable, resourceful, and most importantly, we never back down from a fight." The human ambassador locked eyes with each council member in turn. "I volunteer to lead a special task force. Give us access to your tech and intel, and we'll find a way to stop the Zirathi advance." An uneasy silence fell over the chamber as the representatives considered Brian's proposal. Finally, the Hazari councillor spoke. "Very well, Ambassador James. You have our support, but know that the fate of the galaxy rests on your shoulders." As the meeting adjourned, a cloaked figure slipped away from the shadows, fingers flying across a hidden data pad. "The human DNA secret is out," they typed, encrypting the message before hitting send. Brian hit the ground running, assembling his team with ruthless efficiency. His first recruit, Dr. Lena Sorensen, a xenobiologist whose published works on Zirathi physiology had earned her both acclaim and controversy. "Dr. Sorensen," Brian greeted her with a firm handshake, "I need your expertise on this mission. The Zirathi are unlike anything we've faced before." Lena met his gaze with a fierce determination. "I've been studying their biology for years. If there's a weakness to exploit, I'll find it." As the team prepped their gear and reviewed mission parameters, Brian's wrist communicator pinged with an incoming message. "Commander, we've received an anonymous tip," his second-in-command reported. "It suggests the Zirathi's actions are tied to something called the Artifact. Ever heard of it?" Brian frowned. The name stirred a vague memory, but he couldn't place it. "No, but we'll add it to our list of leads. Gear up, people. We're heading into uncharted territory." The team boarded their state-of-the-art stealth ship, the Phantom. Brian strapped into the pilot's seat, his mind racing. Somewhere out there, the Zirathi were enslaving entire civilizations. Somewhere out there, an ancient power waited to be unleashed. And somehow he knew the key to everything rested within the very DNA of his species. As the Phantom slipped into the inky void of space, Brian felt the weight of the galaxy's fate settling onto his shoulders. The Phantom slipped into the Xanthian system, its advanced cloaking tech concealing it from the Zirathi's sensors. Brian stared out the viewport at the once thriving world, now a husk of its former glory. Stripped mines scarred the planet's surface, and orbiting shipyards churned out Zirathi warships. "I'm detecting multiple Xanthian life signs in the labor camps near the capital," Lena reported, her fingers flying over the scanner controls. Brian nodded grimly. "Then that's our target. We'll infiltrate the camp, gather intel, and free as many prisoners as we can. Kozlov, Takeshi, you're on diversion duty. Sabotage their mining equipment, create some chaos. The team snapped into action, donning disguises and prepping gear. Brian and Lena, dressed as Zirathi overseers, beamed down to the outskirts of the camp, while Kozlov and Takeshi slipped away to plant explosives. Inside the camp, the stench of despair and brutality assaulted their senses. Xanthians, once proud and strong, shuffled in chains, their spirits broken by the Zirathi's cruelty. Brian's fists clenched as he watched an overseer lash a fallen worker. "We have to do something," he whispered to Lena, who nodded in agreement. As they made their way deeper into the camp, they spotted a group of Xanthians being herded into a sinister-looking laboratory. Screams of agony echoed from within, and Brian's stomach churned at the thought of the experiments taking place. "There," Lena hissed, pointing to a small side entrance. "We can sneak in through there." Inside the lab, the true extent of the Zirathi's depravity became clear. Xanthians strapped to operating tables writhed in pain as Zirathi scientists injected them with glowing serums and carved into their flesh. Fighting back revulsion, Brian and Lena made their way to a terminal and downloaded as much data as they could. As they worked, a hidden door caught Lena's eye. "Brian, look at this," she called softly, prying the door open to reveal a chamber filled with ancient artifacts and dusty tomes. Brian's eyes widened as he scanned the records, piecing together a shocking revelation. The Xanthians and the Zirathi, they have a shared history, some kind of ancient connection. Before they could decipher more, alarms blared throughout the camp. "Intruders in the lab!" a Zirathi voice bellowed. Guards poured into the chamber, psionic energy crackling from their hands. Brian and Lena dove for cover, blaster bolts scorching the air around them. "We're outnumbered," Lena shouted, returning fire. Brian gritted his teeth, reaching deep within himself to the untapped potential of his human DNA. Time seemed to slow as he leaped from cover, his reflexes and aim enhanced by the rush of adrenaline. Zirathi guards fell before his onslaught, but more kept coming. Lena cried out as a psionic blast caught her in the chest, sending her crumpling to the floor. "No!" Brian roared, hurling a grenade and scooping up his fallen comrade. He blasted a hole through the wall and ran for the cells, freeing a dozen Xanthian prisoners before fighting his way back to the extraction point. As the Phantom rocketed away from the planet, Brian cradled Lena's unconscious form, the stolen artifacts and data stored safely on board. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of the fragments they'd uncovered. The Zirathi's true motives remained shrouded in mystery, but one thing was certain. The key to stopping them lay hidden in the past, and Brian would tear the galaxy apart to find it. Back on Concordia, Brian carried an unconscious Lena to the medical bay. He laid her gently on a bed, brushing strands of hair from her battered face. "Stay with me, Lena," he whispered. "We need that big brain of yours." He squeezed her hand, hoping she could sense his presence. In the station's research lab, the rescued Xanthians huddled around the artifacts, murmuring excitedly. One stepped forward, his eyes wide. "These relics, they're part of a larger set, scattered to protect our history from the Zirathi." Brian leaned in, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? What history?" Brian's mind raced. They needed those other artifacts. He turned to his team, his voice steady. "Split up. Half of you stay here, help the Xanthians study what we have. The rest with me. We're going artifact hunting." Brian's search team followed a trail of ancient clues, deciphering star maps and cryptic texts. The path led them to a desolate world, its civilization long crumbled to dust. They picked their way through vine-choked ruins, scanners sweeping for signs of the artifacts. Suddenly a towering temple loomed before them, its doors etched with symbols that made Brian's skin crawl. "There," he said, unholstering his blaster. "Bet you a case of Andorian ale that's our target." The team crept inside, marveling at the advanced technology that still hummed with power. Intricate murals covered the walls, depicting a once great species. Brian ran his fingers over the images. The Xanthians built this, but why here, so far from their homeworld? A whine of energy weapons split the air. Brian spun, heart in his throat, as a squad of Zirathi scouts poured into the temple. "Damn it, we've got company!" Blaster fire erupted, scorching stone and flesh. Brian and his team dove for cover, returning fire. The Zirathi pressed forward, their movements unnaturally swift and coordinated. Searing pain exploded in Brian's shoulder as an energy bolt found its mark. He gritted his teeth, watching his team fall back under the Zirathi's relentless assault. "Regroup at the artifacts," he barked into his comm, desperation clawing at his gut. They couldn't fail, not now. In that moment, something awakened within Brian, an untapped well of power surging through his human DNA. He gasped as psionic energy exploded from his hands, hurling the commander across the chamber. Brian stood dazed as the remaining Zirathi fell to his team's blasters. They stared at him in awe, the artifacts clutched in their hands. "Sir," one whispered, "how did you do that?" Brian squeezed her hand, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "We found more than that. I think we found the key to ending this war." Lena's eyes widened as Brian recounted the mission, the Xanthian's revelations, and his newfound abilities. "Brian," she whispered, "I think I know why the Zirathi are so hell-bent on wiping out the Xanthians." She pulled up a holographic display, ancient text scrolling across the screen. "The Zirathi and the Xanthians. They were once one species, but something tore them apart thousands of years ago. The Zirathi want to erase all trace of that shared history, and their greatest shame." Brian leaned closer, his heart pounding. "What shame?" Lena met his gaze, her eyes haunted. "The Zirathi were the ones who caused the cataclysm that split their people, and they've been trying to cover it up ever since." Brian's fists clenched. The pieces were falling into place, the artifacts, the hidden temples, the Zirathi's desperate quest for power. "We have to stop them," he growled. "We have to expose the truth." Lena nodded, her face grim. "And we have to do it soon. The longer we wait, the more worlds fall to the Zirathi's conquest." Brian turned to his team, the weight of the galaxy settling on his shoulders. "All right, people. It's time to take the fight to the Zirathi. We've got the truth on our side. Now let's use it to bring those bastards down." As the team pored over star maps and battle plans, Brian's thoughts raced. Somewhere out there, the Zirathi leadership was guiding their forces, secure in their lies. But not for long. Brian would find them, and he would make them answer for the billions of lives they'd destroyed. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and Brian would be damned if he let it fall to the Zirathi's twisted ambitions. The council chamber erupted in murmurs as Brian presented the evidence, the holographic display casting an eerie glow. Xanthian and Zirathi, once one people, torn asunder by the Zirathi's lust for power. Lena stood at his side, her wounds healed but her eyes haunted by the horrors they'd witnessed. "We can't let this stand," Brian implored, his voice cutting through the chatter. "The Zirathi's crimes span millennia. They've enslaved entire species, erased history, all to maintain their grip on the galaxy." A Zirathi councillor, his form shimmering with barely contained rage, slammed a clawed fist on the table. "Lies. You would have us turn on our own kind based on the word of primitives." Brian's eyes narrowed. "I've seen your kind's handiwork firsthand. The Xanthians bleed the same as any of us. They deserve to be free." The debate raged for hours, voices rising and falling like the tides of war. Some councillors called for caution, for diplomacy. Others demanded action, retribution for the Zirathi's atrocities. In the end, it was the human ambassador's impassioned plea that swayed them. "We have a chance to make this right," Brian said, his voice raw with emotion. "To forge a new future, one where no species lives in fear. But we can't do it alone. We need allies, and the Xanthians need our help." The council voted, and the decision was made. They would stand against the Zirathi, but first Brian would need to secure the support of the Xanthian resistance. The Phantom sliced through the void, its cloaking field shimmering as it approached the Xanthian homeworld. Brian stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The once vibrant planet was now a husk, its surface scarred by Zirathi strip mines and sprawling slave camps. "We're being hailed," Lena reported, her fingers flying over the comms panel. "It's the Resistance." The view screen flickered, and a battle-scarred Xanthian appeared, his eyes hard as flint. "I am Zaxor," he growled, "leader of the Free Xanthians. What business do you have here, outsider?" Brian stepped forward, his head held high. "I am Brian James, emissary of the Galactic Council. We know the truth about your people's history with the Zirathi. We're here to help." Zaxor scoffed, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "The Council has ignored our plight for generations. Why should we trust you now?" Brian met the Xanthian's gaze unflinchingly. "Because I've seen what the Zirathi are capable of. I've fought them, bled with your people, and I know that together we can end their tyranny." There was a long pause, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Finally, Zaxor spoke. "Very well. But if you truly wish to aid us, you must first prove your worth." The view screen shifted, displaying a towering structure bristling with defenses. "This is the Zirathi's central command. From here, they control the psionic dampening fields that suppress our abilities and break our will." Brian leaned forward, his eyes glinting with determination. "Then that's our target. We infiltrate the command center, disable the dampeners, and free your people to fight back." Zaxor nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Succeed, and the Xanthian resistance will stand with you against the Zirathi. Fail, and our people's blood will be on your hands." The Phantom slipped through the Zirathi defenses, its advanced stealth tech masking it from sensors and patrols. Brian, Lena, and a hand-picked team of human and Xanthian operatives crept through the bowels of the command center, their weapons at the ready. Lena consulted her datapad, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The dampening field control room should be just ahead. If we can access the mainframe, I should be able to shut it down." Brian nodded, his grip tightening on his blaster. "Stay sharp, the Zirathi won't give up their hold on the Xanthians without a fight." As if on cue, a squad of Zirathi guards rounded the corner, their psionic blades crackling with energy. Brian and his team dove for cover, trading blaster fire with the enemy. A Xanthian operative fell, his chest pierced by a psionic bolt. Brian gritted his teeth and lobbed a grenade, the explosion scattering the Zirathi like leaves in a gale. They fought their way to the control room, Lena's fingers flying over the mainframe's interface. "I'm in," she reported, her voice tight with concentration. "Dampening fields disengaging in 3, 2, 1. A pulse of energy rippled through the command center, and suddenly the Xanthians' eyes began to glow with psionic power. They turned on their Zirathi captors, their newfound abilities lending them strength and speed. Brian and his team raced through the chaos, making for the Phantom. But as they reached the hangar, a figure stepped from the shadows, his form wreathed in dark energy. "You have meddled in affairs beyond your understanding," the Zirathi leader hissed, his eyes boring into Brian's. "I am Xanath, and I will not allow you to undo centuries of careful planning." Brian stepped forward, his own psionic power rising to meet Xanath's. "Your lies end here," he growled. "The Xanthians and the Zirathi were one people before you tore them apart, no more." Xanath laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You know nothing of our history, human. The Xanthians were weak, unworthy of the power we wield. Under my rule, the Zirathi will ascend to our rightful place as masters of the galaxy." Brian's eyes narrowed, and he launched himself at the Zirathi leader, psionic energy crackling around him. They clashed in a storm of dark power, the very air shimmering with the force of their blows. But even as they fought, the Xanthian resistance surged through the command center, their psionic powers now fully unleashed. The tide of battle turned, the Zirathi falling before the onslaught of their once enslaved kin. Xanath stumbled, his concentration broken by the sudden shift in power. Brian seized his chance, his fist connecting with the Zirathi leader's jaw in a burst of psionic energy. Xanath crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "How could mere humans hope to stand against the might of the Zirathi?" Brian stood over him, his eyes hard as diamonds. "We stand together," he said. his voice ringing with conviction. "Humans, Xanthians, and all those who believe in freedom. Your reign of terror is over, Xanath." As the Zirathi leader was taken into custody, Brian turned to his team, his heart swelling with pride. They had struck a blow against tyranny, but the fight was far from over. The Xanthians had taken back their homeworld, but the Zirathi still held sway over countless systems. The Galactic Council would need to unite as never before, to stand against the darkness and forge a new future for all species. But for now there was hope. The Xanthian resistance had risen, the truth of their history now known to all. And with the power of human adaptability and the strength of unity, anything was possible. As the Allied forces mobilized for their final stand against the Zirathi, Brian's wrist communicator chimed with an incoming message. Dr. Orin's face filled the screen, his eyes alight with excitement. "Brian, I've made a breakthrough. The human DNA samples you sent me, they hold the key to countering Xanath's psionic manipulation." Brian leaned in, his heart pounding. "What do you mean, Doc?" "Your ability to adapt, to tap into psionic powers, it's not just a fluke, it's a fundamental aspect of human biology. If you can get close enough to Xanath, you may be able to break his hold on the Zirathi." Brian's mind raced. He thought of the Xanthians, enslaved for generations, of the Zirathi, their true nature suppressed by Xanath's lies. "I have to try," he said, his voice steady. "For all of us." The Phantom sliced through the void, flanked by a fleet of Xanthian and Council ships. As they neared the heart of the Zirathi Empire, the enemy's defenses swarmed to meet them. Fighters danced in a deadly ballet, explosions blooming against the starscape. On the ground, Xanthian resistance cells struck at key targets, guided by the intelligence Brian's team had gathered. Supply depots erupted in flames, communications towers crumbled, and Zirathi troops found themselves cut off and isolated. Brian, Lena, and Zaxor fought their way through the streets of the Zirathi capital, the air thick with smoke and the screams of the dying. Xanath's citadel loomed before them, a twisted spire of dark metal and pulsing energy. As they breached the outer defenses, Brian felt a presence brushing against his mind, cold and insidious, Xanath's psionic power reaching out to ensnare him. He pushed back, drawing on the strength of his human DNA, and the presence recoiled. They burst into the heart of the citadel, a cavernous chamber pulsing with malevolent energy. Xanath stood at its center, his form wreathed in shadows. "Foolish humans," he hissed, his voice echoing in their minds. "You cannot hope to stand against the might of the Zirathi." Brian stepped forward, his eyes blazing with psionic energy. "We stand together," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "Humans, Xanthians, and all those who believe in freedom. Your reign of lies ends now, Xanath." The Zirathi leader laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You think you can challenge me, boy? I have controlled the Zirathi for centuries. Your mind will be mine, just like all the others." Brian and Xanath clashed in a storm of psionic energy, their minds locked in a battle of wills. Brian could feel Xanath's power, ancient and corrupt, seeking to overwhelm him. But he held fast, drawing on the knowledge of the artifacts, the strength of his allies, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. With a final surge of effort, Brian shattered Xanath's mental grip, the feedback cascading through the Zirathi's collective consciousness. Across the Empire, Zirathi soldiers staggered as the veil of lies lifted from their minds. Some lay down their arms, tears streaming down their faces as they remembered their true past. Others, still loyal to Xanath, fought on with desperate fury. In the chaos, Xanath fled, his form vanishing in a swirl of shadow. "This isn't over," his voice hissed in Brian's mind. "I will return, and the Zirathi will be mine once more." As the Zirathi's power structure crumbled, the Allied forces surged forward, liberating world after world. Xanthians and Zirathi alike wept as they embraced, the wounds of centuries beginning to heal. But even as the galaxy celebrated, Brian knew that the fight was far from over. Xanath was still out there plotting his revenge, and the scars left by the Zirathi's reign would take generations to fully heal. With Xanath's defeat, an uneasy peace settled over the galaxy. The Galactic Council convened on Concordia once more, the chamber abuzz with heated debate. Representatives from 100 worlds argued over the fate of the Zirathi and the Xanthians, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and recrimination. "The Zirathi are a plague upon the galaxy," the Carathian ambassador snarled, slamming his fist on the table. "They must be punished for their crimes, their empire dismantled, and their leaders put to death." Others called for a gentler approach, insisting that only through reconciliation and understanding could true peace be achieved. The debate raged for hours, with no clear resolution in sight. As the council members bickered and postured, Brian sat in silence, his mind racing. He had seen firsthand the horrors inflicted by the Zirathi, but also the capacity for change and redemption within their people. He thought of the reformed warriors who had fought alongside him, risking their lives to overthrow Xanath's tyranny. When the time came for him to speak, Brian rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the din. "I propose a compromise," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled delegates. "The Zirathi will be allowed to maintain their own government and culture, but under the supervision of this council. They must work to make amends for their past actions and prove themselves worthy of our trust." He turned to the Xanthian delegation, their faces etched with the scars of a century of oppression. "And the Xanthians will receive our full support in rebuilding their society and reclaiming their heritage. They have suffered long enough." As the council members mulled over his words, a hooded figure slipped through the crowd, pressing a data chip into Brian's palm. "Xanath lives," the stranger whispered, before melting back into the shadows. Brian's heart raced as he reviewed the contents of the chip. Xanath, it seemed, had escaped to a remote and uncharted system, where he was gathering his remaining loyalists for a final desperate bid for power. He knew what he had to do. With the council's blessing, Brian assembled a new team, drawing from the ranks of the Xanthian resistance and the reformed Zirathi. Among them was Zaxor, the grizzled warrior who had become a trusted friend, and Kala, a former Zirathi commander whose tactical brilliance had proved invaluable in the fight against her own people. As they boarded the Phantom once more, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Xanath was cunning and ruthless, and he would no doubt have planned for every contingency. The journey to Xanath's hiding place was fraught with peril. They navigated through treacherous asteroid fields, the chunks of rock and ice slamming against the Phantom's hull with bone-jarring force. They fought running battles with Zirathi loyalist ships, the void lit up with the flare of plasma cannons, and the silent screams of dying crews. And through it all, Brian couldn't shake the growing suspicion that there was a traitor in their midst. Vital information seemed to be leaking to the enemy, and tensions within the team rose to a breaking point. Kala confronted him one night in the Phantom's cramped mess hall, her eyes hard as flint. "You think it's one of us, don't you?" she demanded, her voice low and angry. "After all we've been through, you still don't trust us." Brian met her gaze unflinchingly. "I trust you with my life, Kala, but someone is feeding information to Xanath, and I need to find out who." As they closed in on Xanath's location, the attacks grew more frequent and more desperate. The Loyalists threw everything they had at the Phantom, from suicidal ramming attacks to psionic assaults that left the crew reeling in agony. But finally, after a series of brutal battles and narrow escapes, they cornered Xanath on a desolate, storm-racked planet. The renegade leader had taken refuge in an ancient Zirathi fortress, its walls bristling with weapons and psionic defenses. As they fought their way through the crumbling corridors, Brian could feel Xanath's presence growing stronger, his malevolent will pressing against his mind like a physical force. And then they were in the heart of the fortress, face to face with the monster who had plunged the galaxy into chaos. Xanath stood before them, his eyes blazing with psionic energy, his face twisted into a mask of hatred and madness. "You think you've won, human?" he snarled, his voice echoing inside Brian's skull. "You think you can defeat me?" With a wave of his hand, Xanath sent a blast of psionic force hurtling towards them, the air crackling with raw power. Brian and his team were flung backwards, their bodies slamming against the walls with bone-crushing force. But Brian refused to give in. Drawing upon the collective strength of his allies and the power of his human DNA, he pushed himself back to his feet, his own psionic abilities surging to the surface. He met Xanath's attack with a blast of his own, the two forces colliding in a blinding flash of light and energy. The fortress shook to its foundations, chunks of masonry raining down from the ceiling. And in that moment, Brian saw his chance. With a final desperate surge of power, he broke through Xanath's defenses and slammed into the renegade leader's mind, tearing through his memories and thoughts like a hot knife through butter. Xanath screamed in agony, clutching at his head as he fell to his knees. Around him, his loyalist forces collapsed like puppets with their strings cut, their wills broken by the defeat of their master. Brian stood over Xanath's broken form, his chest heaving with exertion. "It's over," he said, his voice raw and exhausted. "Your reign of terror ends now." As they dragged Xanath back to the Phantom in chains, Brian couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. They had won, against all odds. The galaxy was safe, at least for now. But he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The scars left by the Xerathi's rule would take generations to heal, and there would always be those who sought to exploit the chaos for their own gain. But for now there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon, a chance for a new beginning, a new era of peace and cooperation between the races of the galaxy. And Brian would be there to see it through, no matter the cost. The Phantom slid into Concordia Station's main hangar, the automated moorings locking it into place as the engines powered down. Escorted by a dozen armed guards, Brian and his team led the shackled Xanath down the boarding ramp, his once proud bearing now shattered by defeat. News of their victory had spread like wildfire, and the station's halls were lined with cheering crowds as they made their way to the council chambers. Delegates from 100 worlds had gathered to witness the arrival of the Xerathi tyrant, their faces a mix of relief, anger, and grim satisfaction. Brian felt a rush of pride as he took his place before the council, Xanath forced to his knees beside him. He had done what many had thought impossible. He had brought the galaxy's greatest threat to justice. "Ambassador James," the council's speaker intoned, her voice ringing through the chamber, "on behalf of the Galactic Council and all the free peoples of the galaxy, we thank you for your service. Your bravery and dedication have brought an end to Xanath's reign of terror and paved the way for a new era of peace and cooperation." As the council prepared for Xanath's trial, Brian found himself swept up in a whirlwind of interviews, briefings, and strategy sessions. He was hailed as a savior, a peacemaker, a symbol of the new galactic order. But even as he basked in the glow of success, a nagging doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. Something about Xanath's capture had been too easy, too neat. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle. Brian felt a chill run down his spine as she handed him a datapad, the screen filled with intercepted transmissions and decoded messages. As he read, his blood ran cold. "Lena," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "She's been working with Xanath all along." The interrogator nodded grimly. "It appears that Dr. Sorensen has been part of a hidden faction of Xerathi extremists, using her position on your team to sabotage your efforts and gather intelligence for Xanath." Brian's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Lena's insistence on studying the Xanthian artifacts, her uncanny ability to anticipate the Xerathi's moves, her recent distance and secrecy. It all made sense now. He felt a surge of anger and betrayal, mixed with a deep aching sadness. Lena had been more than just a teammate. She had been a friend, a confidant, someone he had trusted with his life. Steeling himself, Brian made his way to the detention block where Lena was being held. He found her sitting calmly in her cell, her eyes meeting his with a cool, unreadable expression. "Why, Lena?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Why would you betray us like this?" Lena stood, her movements fluid and graceful despite the shackles on her wrists. "I haven't betrayed anyone, Brian," she said, her tone almost pitying. "I've been fighting for the survival of my people, just as you have for yours." She stepped closer to the force field separating them, her gaze intense. "The Council is weak, Brian. They'll never be able to maintain peace in the long run. Only through the strength and unity of the Zirathi can we hope to achieve true stability." Brian shook his head, incredulous. "And you think enslaving and slaughtering other species is the way to achieve that? Lena, listen to yourself." Lena's eyes flashed with anger. "I've seen the truth, Brian. I've delved into the secrets of human DNA, unlocked its potential. With that power, the Zirathi could be unstoppable." Brian stared at her, his heart torn. A part of him longed to take her hand, to believe in the future she promised, but he knew deep down that her path could only lead to more bloodshed, more suffering. "I can't, Lena," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I won't be a part of more violence and destruction. Please, it's not too late to turn back." Lena's face hardened, her eyes glinting with a fanatic light. "Then you're a fool, Brian James, and you'll die with the rest of the Council's lapdogs." They grappled in a swirling maelstrom of psionic power, their minds locked in a desperate struggle for dominance. The very air around them crackled and sparked with energy, the fabric of reality straining under the force of their battle. Brian could feel Lena's consciousness boring into his own, seeking to overwhelm his defenses and crush his will. But he pushed back with all the strength of his human spirit, drawing on the lessons of adaptability and resilience that had brought him this far. In a final, wrenching effort, Brian managed to break through Lena's assault and send a powerful psionic pulse directly into her mind. She screamed in agony, her body convulsing as the energy tore through her synapses. As the dust settled, Brian staggered to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Lena lay crumpled on the floor, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. With a trembling hand he reached out to check her pulse, hoping against hope that she had somehow survived. But there was nothing. No heartbeat, no flicker of life in her vacant gaze. Brian sank to his knees, cradling Lena's lifeless form in his arms. Tears streamed down his face as the weight of what he had done crashed over him. He had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. Lena, his friend and ally, was gone. As the Council's security forces rushed in to secure the area, Brian could only sit there, numb with grief and shock. The future he had fought so hard for suddenly seemed hollow, tainted by the blood on his hands. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that the scars of the conflict would take years, perhaps generations, to heal. But he also knew that he had a responsibility, a duty to the galaxy he had helped to save. With a heavy heart, Brian rose to his feet, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. He would honor Lena's memory, not by following her path of violence and domination, but by working to build a better future for all the peoples of the galaxy. Brian stood before the holographic projector, his eyes scanning the star map with a mix of determination and weariness. In the months since Xanath's defeat and Lena's betrayal, he had thrown himself into the monumental task of rebuilding the shattered galaxy, coordinating relief efforts, brokering peace deals between the Zirathi and the Xanthians, and rooting out the last remnants of Xanath's loyalists. It was exhausting work, but it kept his mind off the pain of Lena's treachery. A flashing icon on the map caught his attention, and he zoomed in, his brow furrowing. A remote system on the fringes of Council space, home to a small Zirathi colony that had been out of contact for weeks. Normally, he wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something about the colony's last transmission nagged at him. He tapped a few commands into the console, bringing up the garbled message. Experiments. Combining Zirathi and human DNA. New breed of super soldiers. The words sent a chill down his spine. If Lena's extremist faction had survived, if they were still pursuing their twisted goals... Brian strode into the council chamber, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The representatives fell silent as he approached, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Councillors," he began, his voice grave, "I have reason to believe that a faction of Zirathi extremists is still active, and that they are conducting illegal experiments, to create genetically enhanced super soldiers. He laid out his evidence, watching as the councillor's expressions shifted from disbelief to horror. "We must act now," he urged, "before this threat grows beyond our control." But the council hesitated, mired in debate and indecision. Some argued for caution, for diplomacy. Others warned of the risks of reigniting the war. Brian's frustration mounted as the hours dragged on, until finally he could take no more. "If you won't act, then I will," he declared, his voice ringing with resolve. "I'll assemble a team, investigate this threat and put a stop to it, with or without your blessing." He turned on his heel and strode from the chamber, his mind already racing with plans. He would need a small trusted group: Zaxor, the grizzled Xanthian warrior; Carla, the reformed Zirathi soldier; and Dr. Orin, the brilliant geneticist who had first unlocked the secrets of human DNA. They met in a secluded hangar bay, their faces grim as Brian laid out the mission. "We're heading deep into the Outer Rim," he explained, pointing to the star map. "To a hidden research facility run by the extremists. We go in quiet, gather evidence, and destroy the facility. No loose ends." The team nodded, their eyes hard with determination. They boarded a sleek, unmarked shuttle, its hull shimmering with advanced stealth tech. As the hangar doors slid open and the shuttle slipped into the void, Brian felt a sense of grim purpose settle over him. Whatever horrors awaited them, whatever battles lay ahead, he would face them head-on, for the sake of the galaxy and for the memory of those he had lost. The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of a binary star system, its sensors scanning for signs of the extremists' base. Carla, hunched over the navigation console, let out a low whistle. "Got it," she said. "A small moon orbiting the gas giant. Shielded from scans, but definitely artificial structures on the surface." Brian nodded, his jaw set. "Take us in, low and slow." The shuttle skimmed over the moon's cratered surface, its cloaking field shimmering against the starlit sky. As they approached the coordinates of the base, a towering structure came into view, a sprawling complex of domes and spires, bristling with sensor arrays and defense turrets. "There's our target," Brian said, his voice tight. "Orin, you're with me. We'll infiltrate the main lab, gather what data we can. Zaxor, Carla, plant the explosives, and cover our exit." The team split up, moving with practiced efficiency. Brian and Orin crept through the eerily silent halls of the facility, the only sound the hum of machinery and the faint bubbling of liquid in the tanks that lined the walls. Inside the tanks floated grotesque shapes, Zirathi and human bodies, twisted and fused together in a mockery of life. Orin's face paled as he studied the readouts on the tanks. "My God," he whispered, "they've done it. Merged human and Zirathi DNA to create a new species, stronger, faster, with the psionic abilities of the Zirathi and the adaptability of humans." Brian's stomach churned as he downloaded the research data, his mind reeling with the implications. An army of these super soldiers, under the command of Lena's extremist faction, would be unstoppable. The galaxy would burn. A sudden explosion rocked the facility, alarms blaring to life. Zaxor's voice crackled over the comms. "We've been made. Charges are set, but we've got company." Brian and Orin raced back through the halls, the sound of gunfire and psionic blasts growing louder with each step. They burst into the central chamber to find Zaxor and Carla locked in a desperate battle with a group of figures in black armor, the super soldiers, their eyes glowing with unholy energy. Brian leaped into the fray, his own psionic power surging to the surface. He felt the rush of energy coursing through his veins, the air crackling with raw force as he unleashed a wave of telekinetic fury. The super soldiers staggered, their armor cracking under the onslaught. But they recovered quickly, their movements a blur of speed and strength. One slammed into Brian, sending him crashing into a bank of equipment. Another grappled with Zaxor, the Xanthian's blade flashing in the chaos. Brian staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. He saw Carla go down, a super soldier's fist slamming into her chest. Orin, his face twisted in terror, fumbling with the detonator for the explosives. With a roar of defiance, Brian gathered every ounce of his psionic might. and unleashed it in a blinding surge of energy. The super soldiers crumpled, their bodies flung like rag dolls. Brian's team, battered but alive, stumbled towards the exit, the timer on the bombs ticking down. They barely made it to the shuttle before the facility exploded, a plume of fire and debris erupting from the moon's surface. Brian sagged into his seat, his body aching with exhaustion and pain. But there was no time to rest. The explosion had triggered a chain reaction in the moon's unstable core, sending shockwaves rippling through the system. Nearby colonies, already fragile from the war, were thrown into chaos as the tremors hit. Brian and his team raced from world to world, coordinating rescue efforts and trying to maintain order as the sector teetered on the brink of collapse. They worked tirelessly, pushing themselves to the limit as they fought to save lives and hold the fragile peace together. But even as they struggled to contain the damage, Brian couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that gripped him. The super soldiers they had faced were just the beginning, a taste of the threat that loomed on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Lena's faction was still plotting, still scheming to plunge the galaxy back into the darkness of war. And Brian knew, with a grim certainty, that he would have to be ready to face them. As the chaos of the extremist attack spread across the sector, Brian pushed his team to their limits, chasing down leads and cutting off support networks with ruthless efficiency. They raided hidden bases and intercepted encrypted transmissions, piecing together the shattered remnants of the conspiracy. But with each new discovery, the true scope of the extremists' influence became clearer and more terrifying. Whispers of corruption reached the highest levels of the council, and Brian soon found himself questioning the loyalty of even his most trusted allies. The trail led them to Dr. Orin's laboratory, hidden away in a remote asteroid field. They burst in, weapons drawn, only to find the scientist waiting for them, a look of grim determination on his face. "It's over, Orin," Brian snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We know about your involvement with the extremists." Orin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you understand, but you don't. The Council is weak, divided. Only the Zirathi have the strength to bring order to this chaos." Brian's eyes narrowed. "By creating an army of hybrid super soldiers, by plunging the galaxy into another war." "War is inevitable," Orin replied, his voice cold. "The only question is who will emerge victorious. With these hybrids, the Zirathi will be unstoppable." Brian's grip tightened on his weapon, but before he could respond, an alarm blared through the lab. Orin smiled. "You're too late. The final phase of our plan has already begun." On the viewport, a massive space station shimmered into view, its hull bristling with weapons and defenses, the extremist stronghold, hidden in plain sight. Brian turned to his team, his face grim. "We have to take that station. It's the only way to stop this madness." They boarded the Phantom, racing towards the stronghold with grim determination. Fighters swarmed around them, laser fire filling the void, but they pushed forward, their skills and desperation driving them on. They breached the station's defenses, spilling into the corridors in a hail of gunfire and psionic blasts. Extremist soldiers fell before them, but more took their place, their eyes glowing with fanatical devotion. Brian fought his way to the heart of the station, his team dwindling with each passing moment. Zaxor fell, his chest pierced by a plasma bolt. Kala, overwhelmed by a dozen attackers, disappeared beneath a pile of bodies. And then, in the central chamber, Brian found himself face to face with the extremist leader, a towering Zirathi, his body rippling with unnatural muscle and power. "You humans," the warlord sneered, "so arrogant, so sure of your place in the galaxy. But you are nothing compared to the might of the Zirathi." Brian felt a surge of anger, his psionic energy crackling around him. "We may not be perfect, but at least we fight for something greater than ourselves. You fight only for power and control." The warlord laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Power is the only thing that matters, and with the strength of your DNA I will have power beyond imagining." They clashed in a storm of psionic energy, the very fabric of reality warping around them. Brian felt his strength waning, his body pushed to its limits by the warlord's relentless assault. But in that moment, he felt something else, a connection to the countless generations of humans who had come before him, to the indomitable spirit that had carried them from the savannas of Earth to the stars themselves. With a final desperate surge of power, Brian broke through the warlord's defenses, his mind tearing through the Zirathi's enhanced body like tissue paper. The warlord fell, his lifeless body crashing to the floor. But even as Brian stood over him victorious, he felt the station shudder beneath his feet. Alarms blared, warning of imminent collapse. Brian raced through the crumbling corridors, the few remaining survivors of his team at his heels. They barely made it to the Phantom before the station exploded, the shockwave hurling them through space like a leaf in a hurricane. Brian watched from the cockpit as the stronghold disintegrated, the secrets of the Zirathi human hybrids vanishing in a blaze of light and fire. In the days that followed, the Council struggled to regain control, its authority shattered by the revelations of corruption and betrayal. Some hailed Brian as a hero, a savior of the galaxy. Others condemned him as a renegade, a dangerous maverick who had taken the law into his own hands. When the offer came to join the Council, to help guide the rebuilding process, Brian wavered. The temptation to shape the future, to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again, was strong. But in the end he declined. The losses he had suffered, the horrors he had witnessed, weighed too heavily on his soul. He needed time to heal, to come to terms with the darkness he had seen in the hearts of both humans and Zirathi. He returned to Earth, to the rolling hills and quiet forests of his childhood, but even there he could not escape the memories, or the knowledge that the galaxy he had fought for was a far more dangerous and complicated place than he had ever imagined. And as he stood beneath the stars, gazing up at the infinite expanse of the cosmos, he knew that his fight was far from over. Out there, in the depths of space, the remnants of the extremist faction were gathering, plotting their revenge. Brian clenched his fists, his eyes hardening with resolve. He had been given a gift, a power that set him apart from any other human, and he would use that power to protect the galaxy, to ensure that the sacrifices of his friends and allies had not been in vain. The destiny of humanity and the fate of the galaxy itself rested on his shoulders, and Brian would not rest until that destiny was fulfilled. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.